Hi everybody, it's Ajanette and I'm here to go over your Chapter 12 lecture on personality theory. And so in general, personality theory is trying to explain why we are the way we are, what contributes to our attitudes, our demeanors, things of that nature. So when we talk about personality theory, there's been multiple explanations that try to explain why we are the way we are over thousands of years now. Hippocrates thought that there were 4 different temperaments and they were associated with the fluids or humors, as some people may have referred to them in the past. The choleric temperament was associated with maybe imbalances in your yellow bile from your liver. Melancholic is associated with kidney bile. The sanguine temperament is associated with, your blood flow from your heart. And the phlegmatic temperament is associated with the phlegm in the lungs that might build up. And so Hippocrates, although he did emphasize the importance of health and well-being, and certainly we know now that definitely our health can influence kind of our demeanor and attitude, but in general, people really don't subscribe to the notion of the fluids themselves contributing to our personality, although there is more of a biological viewpoint on personality now. Additionally, then there was Galen, and he was a Greek philosopher and a doctor, and he followed Hippocrates, and he felt that, our personality is based on that imbalance of those humors that Hippocrates presented. And he further went on and talked about specific traits associated with each of those personalities. So the choleric is passionate, ambitious, a very bold individual. Melancholic, if you think of melancholy, they're kind of unhappy, very reserved, maybe kind of somber, show some anxiety. The sanguine temperament, I like to think of like sangria, but it's joyful and eager and optimistic. And then phlegmatic, think about how, your lungs are, they kind of calm and consistently flow. They're very reliable, and this person is also thoughtful. So Galen really did expand his concept of, he expanded Hippocrates' theory, and he also kind of talked about maybe how there are multiple dimensions that work together for our physical and health and psychological and emotional health, which was kind of a profound thought as well. And then Gall came along, and Gall is famous for introducing phrenology. So phrenology is the concept, if you've ever heard people talk about the lumps on your head being related to different personalities. And that's what phrenology is. It's the study of the lumps on your head. And it was thought that people could read your lumps to determine your personality. And there was actually in the Psychology Museum at Harvard, there's actually this machine that was invented that they'd stick it on your head and they'd read the lumps, and then they would spit out a personality reading. So the distances between those lumps are supposed to have some sort of identifying factors in terms of your personality. And then Kant came along, and he also believed in that kind of 4 temperament theory, but he felt like they were separate and distinct personalities. And so he actually kind of came up with, expanded on the traits that were proposed in Galen's theory. And then William Wundt came along and kind of divided personality based on these axes, where they have this temperament and then emotional continuum. And temperament can be kind of solid, fixed, or it can be pliable and malleable, and your emotions can go from weak to strong. and each one of the 4 personalities kind of fits somewhere along this axes, these continuums. And so people could either be emotional or non, in addition to having a kind of fixed temperament as opposed to malleable, which kind of speaks to some of the concepts of mindsets of today, where some people have very rigid fixed mindsets and others have much more malleable growth mindsets. A really prominent theorist in psychology in general, but most definitely personality theory, is Sigmund Freud. And he dominated the psychological viewpoints, and you still see a lot of his kind of residual effects today. Like anytime you look at a child misbehaving and you kind of judge the mother for that, that definitely comes from roots of the psychoanalytic perspective. So his theory was the first to introduce this notion of the unconscious, and the unconscious had 3 levels. There's the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. And if you look at kind of an I'm just going to move me over here, an iceberg, it's a really good visual illustration of the 3 levels of the unconscious, with the unconscious being down deep in the abyss, and it requires the support of a psychoanalytic therapist to help you uncover what those unconscious motives are. So our conscious is something that's above the water. It's completely in our awareness. We understand our current motives. We are fully aware of what's happening in our conscious. The preconscious, maybe it's just below the surface, and there might be some, underlying motives or thought patterns that maybe we aren't consciously aware of or thinking about, but just with a little bit of prompting, it might help bring those to your conscious awareness. And then that unconscious, we have absolutely no awareness of at all. It's as if the thoughts and motives in there just don't even exist in our concept, because we absolutely have no recognition of their existence. And so a psychoanalytic therapist is really necessary to kind of dig into that unconscious. And they do that by interpreting dreams, because dreams are thought to be the royal road to the unconscious based on Freud's theory. And we dream in symbols, and those symbols are indicative of what's happening with the conflicts inside of our unconscious. And so a therapist can interpret what's happening in your dreams and theoretically, explain all those unconscious conflicts. And it's thought to be cathartic. Once you have a realization and a recognition of those conflicts, then that kind of releases the conflicts, and that's the primary step toward healing. And what we've kind of learned through research and other therapeutic approaches is awareness of the conflict or problem in and of itself doesn't fix the problem. I can be aware that I have a problem with alcohol, or in my case, men. I don't make the best decisions with men. And I'm definitely aware of some of the underlying factors that might be contributing to that, or that may have contributed to that in the past. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to make the same mistakes. And so it takes more than just awareness to fix your problems. Another way that a therapist could tap into your unconscious is through Freudian slips. Like I might say something inadvertently, or even jokes. I might make a joke inadvertently, and it's supposed to be reflecting what's truly going on or what my true motives are. And so an example is like, I wish you were her. A husband might call while he's away on a business trip and he's talking to his wife and he says, I wish you were her. And what he really meant to say is, I wish you were here. And that Freudian slip indicates, who's her? Like, is there something going on that I should be aware of? And a Freudian, somebody who has a Freudian perspective might very much say, oh yeah, that had some true meaning to it. Another part of psychoanalysis is free association. So Freud was really famous for introducing talk therapy, and he would have his clients, or what he called patients, because Freud was a physician. He was not a psychologist. He was actually a physician. In his day and age, they didn't have a psychology discipline per se. So he was a physician, and he specialized in kind of a psychiatric emphasis. And he would treat patients that were experiencing neurosis, which neurosis was kind of a very common blanket term for people that had inconsistent, unstable personality or emotional issues. And so it was kind of the precursor to mental illness. And then he would have them kind of looking up at a couch, and the therapist would sit behind them. And so there was really no stimulus to prompt your mind or thinking. And so that allowed you to kind of let your mind wander and freely associate. And he would use like projective tests and other mechanisms like word association to try to get you to say something without thinking, and that was supposed to be indicative of your unconscious. And then again, that would be used as resolution. Another area of Freud's perspective is, so Freud had a therapeutic perspective, psychoanalysis, which really was based on the unconscious. He had a personality perspective, which is based on this concept of 3 separate and distinct mental structures. We have an id, ego, and superego that all comprise our personality. And our id is driven based on the pleasure principle. It has very primitive urges. It's the I want it now. I want that candy bar. I want that man, and I'm going to go after it. Or I want that woman, and I'm going to go after it. The superego is really that kind of conscience that we have, that's that moral, upright character that helps us to make correct decisions, and it's kind of our moral compass that guides us. So you have one that's kind of primitive, and I like to think of it as the little devil on my shoulder saying, do it, Aj, eat all that cake. And then the superego that says, that's not healthy for you, and the prim and proper little angel that won't let me go and violate any of those moral codes. And then the ego's that kind of negotiator in between. They're the reality person. They rationalize and they compromise and they say, okay, maybe I shouldn't eat all of the cake, but maybe a healthy slice of the cake is a good alternative or a good compromise. So they try to strike that balance. And when you don't have that healthy superego to balance out those natural primitive urges, your ego has no kind of negotiation power, and therefore you can be imbalanced. And that imbalance is what Freud said contributed to neuroses or neurotic tendencies, where people would have negative emotions or uncontrollable emotions, and they would continue to have life struggles. And a lot of the id is driven by those sexual primitive urges and a lot of aggressive urges. And you can see aggression in babies when they throw tantrums, and they don't have to be taught. They just naturally become angry and sometimes enraged, depending upon the circumstance. And that being said, we have sexual impulses, and in Freud's day and age, he grew up in the Victorian era, and those were considered to be highly immoral and socially unacceptable. And so, it stands to reason why they would look at those as kind of untamed primitive urges, because that was kind of societal ideals and judgments being placed on that. And so, definitely that kind of black shadow, negative side of the character is driven by the id. And the role of a good parent is to build a good superego and moral compass. And that predominantly fell on the mother as her responsibility, and those first 5 years of life were thought to be critical. And we'll talk more about that in the next video. We'll get into Freud's psychosexual theory of development and talk about really kind of the stages that he proposed that we go through in developing our personality and who we are as human beings. So I'll be back. Take a quick break.